curious case of the horny lingos, or the ballad of Tiny Hands, the day he got the clap. What should we go for? Should we do the ballad of Tiny Hands? It's pretty fucking keno. It's pretty fucking keno if I do say so myself. Let's do this. Page 143. Let's fucking go. Right, now what? Let's take a guess. What is going to be crazier? Is it going to be the blue-haired, left-wing weirdos that publish Bells of Nevermore? Or is it going to be the satanic Nazis obsessed with werewolves and vampires and ghouls? Let's see. Sponge wants Tiny Hands. We're doing Tiny Hands, Sponge. We're going for the Ballad of the Tiny Hands. I don't know how much longer I can do. I'm sweating to death under this mask. I can barely breathe. This tiny little slit is all I have for air. And I smoked a cigarette like a retard in a mask. Oh dear, oh dear. Right, let's do this. The Ballad of Tiny Hands. The Day He Got the Clap by Pippa Bailey with a bigly help from Lennon Locker. Once upon a time, that time being, regrettably, now, lived a bigoted ignoramus called Tiny Hands. Tiny Hands was an unusual fellow, with hands so small that he could only stroke his own eagle. He travelled through life, attempting to make big impressions among small-minded people. Unfortunately, he was particularly successful with those who liked to fuck animals and couldn't spell their own name. Alas, in this land we shall call Shame Erica. They outnumbered the brave, the thoughtful, and the wise. Year after year, Tiny Hands lied to these small-minded folks, especially about how big and impressive he was, building huge towers of glass and metal, and putting his name, which he could spell, on the side in glowing letters, so that he knew it was his. After many years of building towers and putting his name on things with his trusted label maker, Tiny Hands was preparing for a new adventure. There was a man who lived in a more impressive house than him, and this made Tiny Hands sad. So incredibly sad that he even paid a woman to pee on his face. We are not sure how this made him feel any better, but whatever floats your boat. He set off on a mission to win this big white house, as there was a competition every 4 years where all the people in Shame America could vote who would run their country and live in this shiny house. Tiny Hands didn't care too much for running the country. That was too much like hard work, and this would cut into his precious golfing time. But he was sure that by gathering a few special friends, especially the ones he liked seeing his name stuck on things, that he, Tiny Hands, would be the bigliest best of everyone ever. With his ideas scrawled in crayon, specifically in the shade Make Shame America Great Again in red, Tiny Hands met with his advisors and began to plan for his campaign for the White House. He knew he wasn't as experienced as the other competitors, but gosh darn it, he was the best at everything. If that was enough for him, it would be enough for everyone else. There would be lots of traveling and meeting like-minded people on his way to the White House. After many gatherings with his advisors, a plan was formulated. He needed to make lots and lots of promises for things that the people of Shame America wanted. His list was bigly, but if he wanted to make Shame America great again, he needed to make everyone happy, or at least those with power and money. Some of the people didn't like his ideas, but those people were wrong. Tiny Hands made sure he told them so, or had beaten them and dragged them away when they came to watch him talk. Soon it was clear that he couldn't make everyone like him, He tried making them hats, which his followers wore with glee, the red shining against their mottled white skin. But this was still not enough for the others. He decided he needed to give them something big, something bigger and better than the other competitors could give. The biggest thing he could think of was the moon, as his advisors recommended against capturing it. They worried that it might roll off the edge of the world and be lost forever. So Tiny Hands promised Shamerica a wall, because it was the biggest thing he could think of. Plus, it would be easy for him to put his name on a wall with his trusty label maker. People were still not happy. They waved signs at him, calling him racist. He hadn't run any races for a while, so these signs confused him somewhat. There had to be a way to make everyone like him. It was then he got a special phone call from the leader of another country. Tiny Hands knew he wasn't meant to talk to Putin. He was mean to his people and liked to ride shirtless on the back of bears, which made Tiny Hands question his masculinity. But Putin had a plan to help Tiny Hands win over the rest of Shamerica and become best friends. Though scientific experimentation and a great deal of torture, he had created a serum that would allow Tiny Hands to control the people of Shamerica and make his hands bigly, like President Obama's hands. The dude had freaking shovels. It wasn't long before the serum arrived, and Tiny Hands could get to work making everyone like him. The instructions weren't very clear. Tiny Hands didn't like reading anything he didn't write himself, and followed the advice of his wife, who was a wealth of knowledge. He stuck it up his fucking arse. Days went by with no noticeable change. At least the crowd he's paid still cheered at his rallies, he thought to himself. But somewhere else the Democrats, the Socialists, and the Liberal fists were unmoved by his bigly promises. The tingle began somewhere between his fingers and Mar-a-Lago. A warmth spread through Tiny Hands' body, like that of an expensive golden shower. His hands began to grow, and grow they did, tripling in size. They were almost as big as an average Shamerican's, but that wasn't all. More growths appeared on Tiny Hands' body. Pustulates formed on his scrotum like jowls, quivering as he talked. It was only a short time before these throbbing masses had spread to his moobs and rear. After attempting to cover his growths with an assorted array of turtlenecks, made in Shamerica, of course, he began shouting at any photographer that tried to sneak a peek of his lumps. Finally, Tiny Hands was convinced by his staff and his stuttering wife to see a doctor, as Dr. Pepper was unavailable. He let his advisors make the arrangements for him. "It's the clap," said the doctors, prodding at Tiny Hands' leaking masses. "I can make big clap sounds now with my big boy hands," said Tiny Hands, not really paying that much attention to his doctor. "Yes, that's nice," said the doctor, gritting his teeth. "What you have is incurable. It's like no form of the clap I have ever seen before. We may need to take some samples for testing." "Oh, I don't need testing." Tiny Hands slid from the doctor's table. "I have the best knowledge anyway, all the smarts. Tests would be too easy for me." With that, despite his doctor actively attempting to help the fool, he left, singing, "What's the worst that can happen?" to himself. Tiny Hands slept badly that night, his growths throbbing as if he was some growing inside him. With a dramatic pop, each of the lumps burst open, firing a shower of small spider-like creatures in every direction. Tiny Hands screamed as he turned on the light. His bed was surrounded by tiny hands, thousands of them, each bouncing playfully on its fingertips. They crawled over and over, some on the bed, others traversing the walls of his solid gold bedroom. His wife heard the scream from her bed down the hall. When she forced the door open, many of the hands rushed past her. Several stopped to grab her by the pussy before crawling away in the night. It's all fake news, declared Tiny Hands, as reports of Tiny Hands attacking people and giving them the clap made their way to mainstream media. The hands had begun to target those who didn't support Tiny Hands. Scientists quickly discovered that they would attack anyone who was not wearing a Make Shame-Erica mask, Great Again hat. Attaching themselves to the base of the spine, they would control their victims, making them attend Tiny Hat's rallies and forcing them to chant his name, which they encountered non-supporters. Soon the other competitors and their followers too wore the hats to disguise themselves, but it was too late. The Republic hands were taking over. On the day of the big vote, they lined the doors to the sites, angrily waving bats and chanting Tiny Hands' name. Anyone who tried to vote differently was beaten mercilessly, with the votes counted soon after, and any votes not for Tiny Hands corrected with crayon. He had won unanimously. On the day of the big vote, "This is a great day for Shame-Erica," announced Trump at the finale. Not only had everyone in Shame-Erica's history voted for him, but also those from a few other countries as well. Weeks later, he moved into the big White House he had always wanted. Now he had won the White House. He could put his feet up. Tiny Hands was not happy when his advisors notified him that he now had to run the country. He had repeatedly told them he didn't run. It was far too much exercise. Tiny Hands didn't like all the work he had to do. He was surprised when people expected him to keep his promises. Between golfing trips, because presidenting for more than 4 days at a time is super hard, he updated his fans on his new rules and variants on his promises, allowing his two most compassionate, educated colleagues to do the talking for him. They would be shaking things up and down, sticking their fingers in all the pies and bombing a few places. Healthcare was no longer needed, as Tiny Hands had created a cure for all diseases in the previous week. Any evidence to the contrary was fake news, of course, along with building his wall, which is now only 1 foot tall. Just tall enough for him to write his name on. He implemented a ban restricting anyone entering Shame-Erica who wasn't white, not owning the large Crayola collection. He struggled to comprehend any colours beyond red, white and blue. It was much easier for Tiny Hands to just say no to anything he didn't understand. This continued for a while, with Tiny Hats making new rules and going on holiday. The Republic hands spread further, attacking the remaining Democrats, Snowcialists and Librafists, who were now in hiding, forming a rebellion against the clap to take back Shame-Erica from Tiny Hands and generally fix all the shit he had broken. Each of the different parties had a unique weapon against evil. The Snowcialists shared among themselves the ability to call forth a mighty blizzard, helping slow the progression of the hands across Shame-Erica. The Democrats had their mighty army of felines. They had undergone weeks of training to target the hands and swiftly extracted them from the bodies of their victims. With the procession of a cat, the tendency of a cat, and the looks of Gary Busey, they made a formidable adversary for the hands. Last but not least were the Librafists. They stood back and hoped for the best. They also made delicious pot brownies, which kept morals high among the parties. The weeks of planning, training, and brownie making had come to fruition. With Bernie Sanders at the helm, the rebel leaders of the hands-off movement were ready for attack. The date was set for Easter weekend. Tiny Hats would be away golfing, as he did most weekends. The traditional Easter egg roll held at the White House had been cancelled, mostly due to poor planning, but also every time the staff attempted to hide the eggs, Tiny Hands would collect them, proclaiming he was the best at egg hunting. Considering there were no other competitors, there was a particularly high chance he was going to win. The attack began slowly, the snowshallists releasing a few small snowstorms across the northeast, allowing them to travel further south. They managed to slow the progressions of the Tiny Hands and prevented them from reaching some of the more isolated groups of rebels. They were also able to send forth a plague of frostbite amongst the hands, the ground now littered with black chunks of detached fingers, the stumps dragging themselves along their few remaining fingers was rather disgusting to behold. No longer did they throttle people in the streets before latching on. The rebels fought back, leading them on with a finger suck before biting off their digits. The further south the storms travelled, the more the unaffected fought back. With remaining hands destroyed, it was now for the Democrats' turn. Their army of felines had secretly been shipped throughout Shea-America. With their love of boxes, it was not hard to transport them to the far corners of the country. As the clock counted down to Easter weekend, the last of the cats was strategically positioned. The attack was precise and calculated, like a glass battered from a tabletop. Cats jumped through windows to get access, using tactical noose bombs to disarm the victims. A quick claw slash was enough to extract the hands, severing the fingers with their sharp teeth. Once these were removed from their bodies, the victims vomited red, white, and blue until their systems were cleared of the clap. Hands were piled high in the town centres and burned. Flying over their rainbow steeds, the rebel leaders could see smoke signals flaring up across the country, each marking a town now free from the control of the hands and eradication of the clap. On holiday, Tiny Hands was unaware of the rebellion. The sun shining on his growths, he admired his big hands while playing with his golf clubs. Unfortunately, they now made Tiny Hands' member look excruciatingly small by comparison. "You bastard!" Bernie Sanders shouted, using his cat launcher to target Tiny Hands. He squeezed off a swift round of felines. Several clung to Tiny Hands' swollen body, clawing at his growths. Tiny Hands wasn't too sure who these people were. He hadn't paid much attention to the other competitors. He flailed widely, attempting to remove the cats from his scarred body. Reaching for his only weapon, he fired a round of name labels at them. He succeeded in taping several of the cats together until they struggled against the Tiny Hands labels that now coated their bodies. He turned his label gun to the sky, shooting at the rebels. They dodged his attacks, landing gracefully on the green. "Tiny Hands, I demand you stop this madness," Bernie Sanders said. Hillary stepped forward. "You've destroyed the fabric of our nation and attempted to mend it with name tags." The Liberafist leader shook his fist in anger and proceeded to raid snacks from the golf cart. They had been traveling a long time, and he had the munchies. "We come in here in the name of love, truth, justice, and maple syrup," said Bernie as they cornered Tiny Hands, his back against his solid gold golf cart. "Maple syrup? Hillary cocked her head in Bernie's direction. "I know there is a pun in there somewhere, just wait for it," he said. She nodded, turning back to face Tiny Hands, who was attempting to clamber into his golf course. Several taped cats rolled past, tripping him. He landed face first in a pile of rainbow dung. Necessary. Also provided by the rainbow steeds previously mentioned in the story, just in case you forgot. "Your tiny hands have been defeated. You have lost. You foul tangerine-tinned cunt waffle," said Bernie. The alliance of rebels who had slowly been invading the golf course cheered. "We are taking back our country. We will no longer be known as Shame-Erica. We are America, because you are the real shame." Bernie smiled to himself. His wit was certainly on form today. "By the power invested in us, by us, we're placing you under arrest. You are charged with treason, collusion, fraud, and genuinely being an asshole." Hillary placed Tiny hands into handcuffs. Bernie smiled. "That's some sticky situation you've got yourself into. There's the pun that I promised." Tiny Hands was carted away in his golf cart. Bernie and Hillary followed closely behind on their rainbow steeds as the LibreFist leader attempted to unstick two of the cats jogging alongside. Tiny Hat's advisors were rounded up and shot. There had to at least be some death in this story, or no one would read it. Tiny Hands was incarcerated without trial, people giving him the middle finger as he was shipped off to talk at a prison in the North Pole, where he would never again get a tan, have anyone to talk at, or have any surfaces capable of sticking his name to. America lived peacefully ever after, with love, truth, justice, and just a little bit of maple syrup. Now you're going to have to excuse me for 1 minute while I vomit off screen. I was fucking retarded. I literally have gained more autism than I already had. I didn't believe that was possible. I'm more autistic after reading that story. I'm sorry, chat. I'm sorry that I had to put you through that fucking childish, retarded book. It wasn't me that wrote that. Somebody published that. They put it out. Somebody read that story and said, "This is brilliant. This is marvellous. We must immediately publish this." It was full of grammatical errors, wrong words. I was stumbling at one point because it was so fucking retarded. 1 second while I vomit. Sneaky Red Bull as well. I'm back. I should have saved that cigarette for now, because I can assure you after that, I fucking need one. That was appalling. That made the vampiric, ridiculous, retarded Nazi story seem good. Can you fucking believe it? Can you believe it? I don't even know what to do from here.